Okay, so welcome everybody. It is such a pleasure to be hosting another Communications Career Day. So thank you to Dr. Knight for helping to coordinate this with the Career Center. It's a true collaboration, and we're really excited to have you personally here as well as your students. So my name is Trish Schaefer. I am the Executive Director of the Career Center here at St. Joseph's University. And we've invited alumni all day to join communication students and others during your classes so that you can start to gain a sense of different career paths that exist, whether it's something that you think you might go into or not. There's a lot of great advice that alums are giving today in terms of what they've done to enhance their careers and to get to where they are. So I just invite you to listen closely, take notes, think about things that resonate for you and those things that don't, as you start to pull together a picture of what you might want to do. So we are so lucky to have with us today Camille Padilla. Did I say that correctly? Thank you. Camille is a 2013 graduate of St. Joe's, and she just mentioned that she did major in English and she minored in international relations and communications. And then she's also a 2014 graduate of the Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She's a storyteller, educator, and founding member of Millones, a platform that connects the 9 million Puerto Ricans across the world through data-driven solutions-based storytelling. Camille creates content that helps change the narrative about the people of Puerto Rico so that people see that they are not defined by their problems, rather how they respond to them. I, for one, am excited to learn more about how you do that, Camille. So welcome even virtually back to Hawk Hill. Camille is joining us today from Puerto Rico, so she's geographically distant, but right here in our offices, in our classrooms, etc. So I am going to be asking Camille a list of about 10 questions, but she did make a request prior to this that in the chat, students, if you wouldn't mind just telling Camille so she can get a sense of who's listening in, what your major is, and maybe what some of your career interests are. And if you don't have any idea yet, that's okay. You don't have to participate. But if you have an idea of what you're exploring or you know what you're thinking about, she'd love to see that in the chat. So you can go ahead and put that in as we get started, okay? So we are going to, and I'll also mention this, sorry, students and audience. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity for that Q&A. And you can also raise your hand at the end and ask them personally if that's the route that you want to go. So, all right, Camille, let's get started, shall we? It's nice to have you back. Great. Okay. So if you could start just by describing your current role, and if you could get into some specifics of like what you actually do, tasks you do, meetings, people you're talking, whatever it might be, so that at the end of a day or a week, you're like, I've given folks an overview of what this job is all about.
Yeah, sounds good. So, hola, everybody. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much. It's exciting that there's so many students here. So I'm the founder of 9 Millones, and I do a lot as a founder of a startup, right? It's a digital media company as well as a network of journalists, designers, and creators. So I definitely don't do this alone, especially now. This past few months, I've been working on hiring a team, right? So to delegate, because I can't do it all, and the vision is too big for one person to do it all, right? So right now, I'm stepping into more of a role of a publisher. So the publisher of a digital media company, they're in charge of the vision of the company. They're in charge of the hiring. They're in charge of managing, making sure to set goals and making sure that the people are fulfilling those goals. So I'll tell you what my week kind of looks like. And on Mondays and Fridays, I take that part for just planning and finance, because that's also a part of what I do, is to make sure that we're making enough money so we can keep telling stories. On Tuesdays and Thursdays are my meeting days. Usually I live in Aguas Buenas, which is like half an hour from San Juan. So usually I go to San Juan and have meetings or sometimes they're virtual meetings, or I'll set up meetings with possible media partners or other journalists. And on Wednesdays, I tend to keep those days more for doing whatever I need to do in that moment. Sometimes more creative work and writing and things like that. So that's kind of what my looked like. I realized last year that I needed to set meetings because too much time was being spent on meetings, and I didn't have time to do the actual work. So that has been something that has been very good for the workflows. And yeah, so my background is more in journalism. I was a reporter for many years, and basically I just didn't find a place where I could truly be the storyteller that I wanted to be, the journalist I wanted to be. But maybe I'm getting into another.
Oh no, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just move into that? What can you just give us a description of your career path, and when did you know that journalism was really something that you wanted to do?
Yeah. So so my first internship, which was after my freshman year, was in a local online news organization here in Puerto Rico. It's called Prensa Comunitaria, like community press. That publication is no longer publishing, but it was a very formative experience for me because, you know, while I was there, I realized how much I loved the exercise of interviewing people, of writing stories. Especially that organization focused on covering historically marginalized communities, and I was just very fulfilled by it. I tested the waters, like I did a marketing internship the year after, and I also did an internship which was part of an abroad experience where I interned with the European Parliament, because I was interested in marketing and government. But that's when I realized I didn't want to do marketing. I didn't want to sell beer all the time, and I didn't, because that was the client that I had was Heineken and Bacardi, and it was fun, but I was like, this is not fulfilling. And then when I worked in government, I was like, this is so bureaucratic. I don't want to be in government. And after my abroad experience, which was in Belgium, I came back to Hawk Hill, and I became more into the newspaper. And eventually I became the online editor of the Hawk, and I redesigned the websites, and I was also always very attracted to online digital, because everyone around me was telling me, like, why do you want to be a journalist? Like, this industry is dying. But I was like, it's not dying, it's transforming. There's just something different. And those were definitely the conversations that we had in our communications major about the digital divide and how things are changing. And that was very formative. And also the fact that our comms professors invited us to be very active. It was a very technical education, and that's how I love to learn, by actually doing. So, you know, J Mike would be like, go to Philly and make a video, and whatever came out, you have to practice. And I like that. I like going places, meeting people, documenting, and then the editing process, the storytelling process. So when I finished, because St. Joe's didn't have a journalism program, like I decided that I wanted to go into journalism. And so I went to Columbia, and that was also a very technical, like, New York is your lab, and you just kind of reported in the city. And that was a lot of fun. I do recommend the CUNY journalism program to people, not the Columbia, just because it's a little more updated now. But you know, the reason I after graduating, I did a lot of freelancing work. I worked as a social media manager. I worked as a radio producer. I babysat because I decided to stay in New York. I needed to pay rent, and I just had to do a lot of jobs. And one thing that I found that they didn't teach you in journalism school is how to be an independent journalist. But a lot of our careers are going to start there if you want to do journalism. And so then I got my first full-time job in El Diario, which is the longest running Spanish newspaper in New York City, and I think actually in the US. And then, and that was a really interesting experience because I was working as a Metro reporter. I was stationed at the NYPD One Police Plaza. It was also a very intense experience because I was covering crime and just a lot of tragedy. And I realized that, and I was writing like 1 to 5 stories a day. That newspaper used to have 7 reporters back in the day. And when I was there, there was 2 covering the whole Spanish speaking population of New York City. So we were definitely overworked. And it got to a point where I really got sick, to be honest. I got depressed because it was too much. And I just didn't have the tools to deal with all the secondary trauma that I was exposed to, but that did invite me to develop a personal like meditation, yoga practice, to work a lot on myself so I wouldn't take on the experiences I was reporting on. And then I decided to look for a job elsewhere, and I landed in Now This, which is a social media publisher. And I was there helping with Now This Español, which was their Spanish vertical, and really saw that audience grow. And I was translating stories that they did in English and then publishing. And at times I also got to do my own stories. But what happened there is that I got to a point where I couldn't grow, and I had a master's in journalism. I wanted to tell stories, but they kind of kept pigeonholed me as a translator. And then I also realized that when the hurricane happened in Puerto Rico in 2017, I was living in New York, and that was kind of like a turning point for me. I always wanted to go back to Puerto Rico and start my own digital media company. Like that was always a dream I had. And the hurricane, when I saw all the way that it was being reported on, I just felt like it wasn't, it kind of was very, it was a tragedy, but it also didn't show like how communities were organizing, and like it didn't really show this sort of transformation that was happening within communities in Puerto Rico. And I wanted to go back and look at how we were responding to the problems we had. And also there was a lack of contextualizing about colonialism and how that affects recovery, right? It's just a lot of the media informs but doesn't contextualize, and contextualizing is what leads to education, and that's what I'm interested in, educating. So I came back to Puerto Rico, and I still worked remotely for Now This for a little bit. And I also became a professor in a local Jesuit university here. And I did that for a couple of years, and I loved it. I love education. And eventually I left Now This, and I was very disenchanted with journalism. I actually started working with nonprofits, doing videos with nonprofits here. And then the pandemic happened, and I had a lot of audiovisual productions that were canceled. And so I kind of took a step back, and I took a couple weeks without doing anything. I started to meditate like 2 hours a day during that time. And it was in that time and in those reflections that I was like, I'm going to start something, because the way I see that the local news is covering Puerto Rico, the COVID response is very alarming. And I have a lot of critiques about the mainstream news media. I believe it's an extractive industry that creates a lot of fear, anxiety, and depression. And I wanted to inform in a way that would make people calm. Because when you're scared, your immune system comes down and you're more likely to get sick. And I thought we needed to inform in a way that's actually nurturing. So that's where we started. And we started doing a newsletter where we would report about COVID, and we were doing a partnership with a local scientist. And then we got the attention of Latino USA, which is back then was an NPR podcast. Now they're with PRX. And we did a podcast about how scientists in Puerto Rico Puerto Rican scientists were hacking the COVID response. And that got the attention of the Solutions Journalism Network. And Solutions Journalism, which is a practice, journalism practice, where you report on the response to social problems is what kind of made me fall in love with journalism again, because I saw that I didn't have to only focus on problems, but the responses, and it just felt much more constructive. And so now I'm a solutions journalism trainer, and that organization, Solutions Journalism Network, gave us a grant to cover the elections. And then I did, like, I was a journalist. I didn't have any business experience. I wish I took a business class in St. Joe's, but I was too creative back then to think that, that was useful. And I did some business accelerator programs. And that really helped me get over a lot of my fears with finance. And now I'm in a point where I feel much more comfortable with budgets and finance and all of that. And basically, if I wanted to change the industry, I needed to understand the finance, because part of the reason that the industry is the way it is because it's based on advertising, and it's based on the impact is measured about how many people view and how many clicks, instead of right now what we're working on as a team is what are non-traditional ways of measuring impact, the impact of our journalism. So yeah, that's a little bit of my career path.
Well, I'm personally learning so much. I hope everybody else is too. And I'm just struck, Camille, by the way that you have, whether it's been intentional or not, the Jesuit values that are so embedded in the work that you're doing between social justice and just that reflection piece that is so important. And you've really incorporated that into your life in such a meaningful way. It's a hard practice, but you seem to have you got it early enough to be like, there's something to this, and really applying it. So I really thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's pretty amazing. So I don't know if there is a career path. I mean, you mentioned that you're stretching your team, you're building your team, and enlarging and all that sort of stuff. Is there a typical career path for an entry-level associate, either within your organization, or is there, for those out listening who are thinking, I do want to be in journalism and Camille's inspiring me, like what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so at a startup, there's probably no typical paths. But like right now, for example, I hired this editorial and an administrative assistant, and I can see how he can grow within the company, right? Like I'm teaching him a lot about the administration and the editorial side, and eventually can be someone maybe that becomes like a managing editor or an editor or something like that. So, these assistant jobs are a way to learn from people, but I also encourage people that if you want to be a journalist, to be an independent journalist, to start pitching stories, to learn about that process, to identify what are publications that you like and that you'd like to write for, and pitch to them, and even you can also self-publish. Right now we have the ability to, like, when I applied to Columbia, some of the clips that I sent might have been from the Hawk, but others were videos that I did on my own, so I think I know there was a question about tips, right, for people, and part of it is just start telling the stories you want to tell, right, and find places where you can publish those stories, and if you don't find a place, publish it yourself, because clips is how you get jobs. Like in journalism, you need to have show people what your writing is like, or your multimedia production.
That's great. And so what is something that you enjoy most about your profession? And if there is something that you could change, what would you change?
Yeah, so I love giving people a space where they feel honored, where their stories are honored. I love when someone, after I interview them, says that it felt like therapy. What is something that I want to change, and I'm changing it, is like, how do we move from an extractive media industry to a regenerative media industry, which what that means to me is that right now, sometimes in the media industry, we extract like people's pain and grief, and then we publish a story that generates fear in the people that are receiving it. And the journalist also just your soul's a little sucked because of that experience, because it doesn't feel right. And and I do think that I am very intentional about putting people's health, forward, right? And well-being. And then regenerative to me means that you're really honoring a person's story in the process of storytelling, that they feel that the process of sharing their story was nurturing, that when the person reads or sees the piece, they feel nurtured, they feel like it was constructive, they feel inspired. And for the journalist itself, and my experience with constructive storytelling is that it's really transformative, that you change through the process of storytelling. So I've been able to do that with the stories I'm working on, and that's also what I'm trying to do with the people that collaborate with us. So it's a little bit of slowing down and questioning how we were taught, how journalism was taught. And because they tell us if it bleeds, it leads, and they tell us to kind of be like a robot. and objectivity, I think, is a myth. I actually think that objectivity is white supremacist, actually. And the idea is that actually we be honest, we be fair, and we be honest about our editorial perspective. So I'm honest about my editorial perspective in the sense that I think the health and well-being of all beings, animals and humans and our ecosystem goes first. Like I'm for living creatures, and also so pro environment. Like I want to protect our environment, and I believe in human rights, and that's my perspective. And as long as I'm honest about it, then and be fair with the reporting, then I think it's fair game, but that's not exactly what we are taught in journalism school.
And it takes a fair amount of courage, wouldn't you say? It's rather than following the path that's been laid out for you, breaking that pattern.
Yes, it's definitely following your heart, right? And courage, the root of that word is cora, which means like from the heart, right? Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a heart-centered approach. And sometimes I say that, I'm like, what does it mean if a news outlet covers things with love? Like, those are things that when we mention it, it might sound very and not important, but to me it is. And we're actually right now doing some evidence-based community outreach research, because we know we are women trying to do a very different approach, but we're going to measure it so we can show how our interventions create hope, and how our stories create hope, and how that's valuable. Yeah.
I love it. Great. That's great. What has surprised you most about your career? What has surprised you most about your career?
Well, I think what surprised me is how hard it was for me and it is for other journalists to follow their curiosity. Reporters are the ones who are on the ground and know what's happening and know what their communities want to know. And just that the editors, the editors want you to do something, but they're not really connected to the community, right? So I think that surprised me, that it wasn't just as romantic as one might have thought that journalist is. Oh, I'm gonna write about whatever I want. No, like if you're in traditional media outlets, they make you write about a lot of things, and you have less space to actually investigate about what you want. So that was surprising to me.
Right. No, that's, and you've sort of said that throughout your
Yeah.
comments. So there's a question in the chat, and it says that you are interested. This is from Ian Sampson. Thank you, Ian. That you're interested in non-traditional ways of measuring impact on your journalism. Can you just say more about that?
Yeah. So non-traditional ways of measuring impact means, so right now, a lot of the way that impact is measured within publishing is by views, by shares, comments, likes. Especially views are what I consider a vanity metric. So for me, I rather know, how did this story inspire someone to take action? Was this story quoted on a ponencia? How do you say that? On like, if someone is advocating for certain things, did they quote this story? We're also right now exploring how we measure hope and how we measure mental health. Like, this is something that right now I'm actually working on with my team with. So I already like hired a team, and now our next meeting, I'm gonna be like, okay, what type of impact do we want to measure? Because this is something we want to do collaboratively. But that's kind of like where we're at, where you can measure hope, you can measure how stories make people feel, or how stories affect people's perception of of what the future could be like. And right now, and the reason I care so much about this is because, Puerto Rico faces a lot of challenges, and not only politically, economically, and socially, and we have high rates of depression and anxiety, but that also happens all across the world. Like, we just live in a world where, even though our basic needs are met more than ever, our need for connection is not being met, and we're actually feeling more isolated than ever, which is a strange thing, because we're actually more connected, but are we really? So those are a few ways. Let me know, Ian, if that answers your question, or if you have any more about that. Yes, great.
Thank you for that. So shifting gears a little bit, can you offer to the students who are listening in just experiences that they should engage in while in college to help them prepare for entering journalism or digital marketing or owning a business? Like, there's so many sort of areas that you cover. So what's
Yeah,
some tips you could give them?
definitely just finding work experience, and related to your industry, and also, like, when you get assignments from your professors that are very like concrete, like, you know I remember the project of Beautiful Social, or if your professor asks you to do like a multimedia piece, um all of, like, do your best, because that's your clip, that's the way you get experience. Sometimes people say, like, oh, I don't have work experience, so I can't get work experience. But if you have a technical education where they're encouraging you to actually create projects that you can show to an employer, just do your best in those projects, because that's going to be what gives you a job, and it's going to give you more experience. And again, if you're having a hard time finding work experience, create content for yourself, uh, or go to the Hawk and start writing there, or you could also, like, do social media for a club, tell, like, an organization that you're working with, hey, I want to do a social media strategy. And that's a way that you can build experience. I think St. Joe's offers a lot of opportunities to create experience within the college, the communications. Like, definitely my first clips were from the Hawk, so don't sleep on those opportunities, because that's what's gonna allow you to find another experience. And also network, meet people from the industry, find, whether it's things like this, or if you see that there's a meeting of communicators in Philly, like, I encourage people to go to downtown, like, you know, explore Philly. Don't stay in campus, because Philly is a beautiful city. Like, and there's so many like opportunities to explore the art and music, and there are also events in cities that you can go to and meet people. And if someone meets you at an event, like I wanted to give the example of, I went to an event in New York, um, with a colleague of mine, and she was speaking, and someone came up to me with a resume after, and I just hired her, right? I was so impressed of this. She printed out her resume. She came to the event we were at, and she gave me a resume and in paper. And I was like, wow, like that to me, that caused an impression, because not a lot of people do that. She's the only person that has done that, right? And now she's working with one of the journalists in our network, and it's like her dream job. So you have to not be afraid to show up. It's like, if you see someone who you want to work with is giving a talk, you go, you talk to them after, because if people see you and know you, then when there's a job opportunity, they're going to be like, oh, that was that person that was wearing that pretty skirt when I met them, or that was that person that gave me their resume. And also not be afraid to pick up a phone, you know, is super important. Sometimes we get a little scared of just cold calling, but that's important, especially in journalism and communications in general. And yeah, and I think when you show up with enthusiasm, like that young student, or she's a recent graduate, like she did, she kind of reminded me of myself, because I was like that. I would go to the place, my resume, and you know, but also, you know, I'm young. I'm almost gonna be 32 soon, but I need young energy like that. I need enthusiasm. So you gotta know that your passion and your enthusiasm is what's gonna want someone to hire you. So, you know, show that enthusiasm, show that passion, because we need that. We need young people that are fresh, that are willing to learn, and that are interested, and always showing that you're open to learning is also a great thing, because you know, you're young, you don't know it all. I don't know it all. We got to be humble too. But there's it's a fine line to play between you're confident, that showing that confidence through showing up, but also that humility of that you want to learn, right?
Yeah. You know, there's an expression, you get what you give, to the point of like the positivity, and your energy and positivity is even coming through the screen. I'm so excited by it. And so I'm sure that's very attractive people who are seeking that in this world where supposedly we're connected, but we're not, right? So I think we have time for one more question. And I guess I want to get into something like maybe very tangible that students can take with them. And you mentioned that you are growing your team. So either from that experience of bringing people onto your team, or what you learned when you were applying to jobs, what are some interview tips that you can offer to students, like what you should definitely do and what you should avoid doing, perhaps?
Yeah. Have questions for the person who is interviewing you, because you need to know that it's as much as an interview to you as you to them, because you also want to know if you really want to work with that person, right? So show them that you looked into the company, and that you want to know more about them. People like when you ask about them and the things they do. Questions like, how do you see the company going? Like, people ask me a lot about my vision for the company, and I love that, because I could share, okay, yeah, this is showing how your growth is connected to the company's growth is also great. I tend to ask people, you know, what do you envision for yourself? What's your dream? And if they answer something that I see is parallel with what I'm trying to do, then I'm like, that's a good fit, right? Let me see. I feel like I had something here that I'm forgetting. Yeah, and know your values, know what's important to you. So then you can know if a company aligns with your own values. And I just thought, yeah, I think that's it. definitely bring questions. I don't think it's not a good sign when you don't have any questions for the person interviewing you.
Right. Because it's a two-way street, right? Like you're being
Mhm.
evaluated as a candidate, but you also want to make sure that you're a good fit with that employer. So
Yeah.
it's important to engage in that. So that's great. So Camille, I know we didn't get to every question, but I feel like we answered them, through
Yeah.
the conversation we've had. And so what I'd like to do is open it up to questions from our guests who joined us today. I might turn this over to Scott from my office, who is helping today, to see if there are any questions that have been added to the chat that he wants to put forth. Scott, do we have anything?
Is anyone there to show their?
Hey, Tristan. No more questions have come into to the chat. So if people, I guess, maybe want to raise their hand or just come off of, unmute yourself and turn your camera on and ask, or you can put something in the chat.
So now's your chance, because Camille gave us, 50 minutes of what is obviously a very busy life. So we'd love to hear what you're thinking, what questions you have for her.
Something that while we see questions coming in, something that I liked in the questions you had sent me was like, what is something that you wish someone would have told you while you were in school? And one is that your health is more important than any job. Your worth is not defined by your job, and your dreams are worth pursuing. If we're gonna look at it from from a Jesuit perspective, is like, I really believe in the concept of grace, and that like God put us in this world to fulfill certain things. And if you have a dream, if you have a desire, then I truly believe it's there for a reason, right? So I would say follow your dreams. I know it sounds cheesy, but there's a reason why that desire is there. I'm gonna see if the chat has any questions. And especially with storytelling, if you have a story that you think is worth telling, follow your curiosity and use the tools available to tell that story. Because storytelling is a beautiful ancient practice that can truly transform the world, I believe. So
So we have a question from Julia Stokes, and she's asking, do you have any tips for moments when you aren't feeling inspired or creative?
Oh my God, that's a great question. Thank you so much, Julia. For me, nature is always a great way to get inspired. I like to learn from nature. So I live in the mountains, so I'm pretty blessed in that way. I have a garden where I can walk to. And I think when you're not feeling inspired, that is a sign that you need to take a break. Sometimes there are days, especially as I become more attuned with like my own menstrual cycle, I see there are times in my cycle where I'm tired and I don't feel inspired. And sometimes the best and more productive thing you can do is rest. And that's okay. We kind of have to get out of this mentality that we always have to be productive. That's just not healthy. And we're cyclical creatures, not linear. And so nature walks, like, or if you don't have a lot of green around you, you can go to a park and have a mindful walk. Sometimes also, if I were in Philly, something that would inspire me a lot was to walk and see the murals, to go to the like gallery nights. Reading can also be very inspiring. I would make a list of like 5 to 10 things that bring joy to you. And whenever you don't feel inspired, just go to that list and do some of those things. But yeah, I feel like at those moments when you're not inspired, don't force it. Just actually ask your body what it needs in the moment. Yeah.
That's cool. Faculty, do you have any questions that you want to pose, knowing that maybe your students won't?
Hey there. Well, Ian already asked his question. Camille, some of the folks here today are from Beautiful Social right now, probably about half of them working on projects. I just wanted to say that you've always been really wise beyond your years, but just how proud we are of you founding your own company. It's absolutely incredible to watch. This is one of my favorite, talks that we've had with alumni, because I just feel like it's so inspiring. It's even inspiring to me. So I hope that students are really getting something out of this too. We're so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That really means a lot. And like I said, my St. Joe's experience was really formative. So I'm really grateful to have had exposure to such an innovative major, because it was very defining. So that's why I'm so happy to come back. I see that there's another question.
Yeah.
He says that he's interested in the frame of extractive versus regenerative, and I'm writing an article about that, Ian, so I'll make sure you get to it. And y'all can send me an email at Camille at 9 millones. I'll write it because .com. But it says, you've talked about some ways you're making that change in your organization. Do you see any other examples of that model? So I'm just going to write my email. So if anyone wants to reach out, I am happy to answer any of your questions. And do I see any other examples? Regenerative media is a term that I don't hear a lot. I hear more about sustainable media, and regenerative is a step further. Sustainable is like stopping the harm, and regenerative is actually nurturing, right? And so, but I do, like yesterday I had a talk. I'm going to go to Chicago in June or July, I can't remember now, but they're going to interview me and one of my colleagues about the work we do. And I felt that they're called the Hootsie in Chicago, and they're like this underground radical radio show. And I thought that their approach is regenerative, because the way they do it is they kind of mix like after hours with a conversation, and it's making it like popular education, right? Which is a term to describe education outside of academia. And I think it's the way that I felt when they were doing the pre-interview felt very nurturing for me as the person being interviewed. I felt very honored, and so I do think that there's a lot of small local independent news organizations that are just questioning the current industry and are taking steps to transform it. I do think that this term regenerative media is something pretty it's just not being used a lot. So that's why I say I'm writing something about it, and I get it. My inspiration is this book called Regenerative Enterprise. And Regenerative Enterprise, which you can find online, it talks about 8 forms of capital. So right now, a lot of the world and corporations work for financial capital and material capital. And they say that there's spiritual capital and cultural capital and living capital. And, and spiritual capital being that makes us feel united. And living capital being like the well-being, the health of the ecosystems and ourselves. And cultural capital, that's where stories come in, right? And our cultures, right? So that's also a part of measuring impact, is measuring those different types of capitals that are beyond financial capital. Because the problem is that what happens with capitalism, which the mindset of capitalism, because you can argue that we don't really live in a free market because big corporations are more have more advantage, so it's technically not a free market. But the mindset that a lot of corporations work towards is that financial capital is the panacea. You want as much wealth as possible. But what happens? That that actually hurts the world. That creates inequity. That is causing the environmental distress that we're seeing right now. So the argument is that we need to actually first focus on how what we do helps the health of the ecosystem, the health of people, the just these other forms of capital, and then we can do the financial growth, you know. So that's that book, Regenerative Enterprise. I highly recommend it, and I'm trying to formulate what that means for media companies, because usually that is talked about more in agriculture, but I believe that it can be applied to media as well, because I don't think we can change society without stories. And that my approach comes from a psychoanalytical, like I go to a therapist because she's helping me tell a story that helps me find more joy in my life, or helps me be at more peace. And so we as society also need to find stories that help us be in more peace and make us feel more connected. And I think the great the climate crisis is really that we're separated from the earth, that we're no longer in the cycles of the earth. And it's really fascinating here in Puerto Rico how I've seen a lot of churches actually talk about the climate crisis and the connection with the earth as part of their a way to getting people be more connected with the earth. So and that's something that I tell the environmentalists, like, we need to pay attention to the churches too, because that's where a lot of people are at, you know. But yeah, Ian, let me know if you have any other questions about that. I'm still formulating all these things, so I'm kind of practicing with y'all, talking about it.
I'm riveted. So you're doing a great job for sure. So Camille, we are coming up to the end of our time. I don't know that we have any more questions that have been in the chat. So it has just been a privilege to converse with you and hear about your ideas and all the truly great things you've done to advance your career and to really transform what's going on in the world with your authentic and just comes from a place of passion. I love it. So thank you for being with us today. We really do appreciate it. And this will be recorded just as a reminder to the viewers, so you'll have access to this, so that if you didn't get enough of Camille, or you want to hear some of the advice she gave again, you'll have the opportunity to do that. So thank you so much, Camille, for being with us.
Thank you so much. And also, if there's any interest in solutions journalism, that's also something that I'd be happy to talk more. I am trained to train, so
that's great.
That's for Dr. Knight, if you ever
want
to.
I see Dr. Knight nodding her head there, so that's great. Thank you, Camille. It was great talking with you.
Take care. Gracias.